Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndal Curtis. A year after the government received the Finkelstein Review of Media, nearly a year since it released the report of the Convergence Review, the government has outlined its proposed media changes and it's giving the Parliament just a week to approve them or the issue is off the table. The government's also announced it's giving itself more powers to oversee coal seam gas projects, making the impact on a water resource one of the things it can look at. Joining me this evening are two MPs, Labor's Stephen Jones and Liberal Alan Tudge. Welcome to you both.
Good to be with you.
We'll go first to the media reforms announced by the Communications Minister Stephen Conray. Included in it is a proposal for a public interest media advocate, which would oversee the public interest of major acquisitions and mergers, and also self-regulation of both newspaper and online media.
The advocate would need to be satisfied that a standards and complaints body has adequate arrangements in place regarding standards of practice which reflect community standards and expectations about news and current affairs, appropriate and responsive complaints handling, arrangements for the body to publish agreed standards.
Any attempt by the government to regulate or further circumscribe the media has got to be viewed with the greatest of suspicion, particularly a government that seems determined to cow the media, to bully the media into not criticising it.
Stephen, one of your colleagues told me this afternoon that the changes he regards the changes as minimalist. They certainly don't go as far as some in your caucus wanted them to go. Is the government doing enough to regulate the media in the eyes of the Labor Party?
Well, I think it's a good first step, and two important things. Firstly, we're looking at the overall consolidation of the national media market and ensuring that where that occurs, where there are mergers and takeovers, that is in the public interest, to ensure that we don't lose in that process a variety of voices, a variety of opinions and reportage within our national media. That's important, and I think most Australians would support that. The second thing is to ensure that the old Press Council, if you like, has a bit more rigour and a bit more teeth in it, and that is mandating that it occur. It'll still be a self-regulatory model, but it must. You can't opt out of it, and that's the crux of it. You cannot opt out of the professional standards, the standards and the avenues of appeal that are available through the Press Council.
Why could not, though, what already exists, particularly when you're looking at competition laws to cover off kind of a diversity of voices, and the Press Council that already exists, why isn't that enough?
Well, let's deal with the competition laws to start with. Competition laws look at something different to what we look at when we're looking at media. Competition laws will ensure that there is adequate competition between two corporations, but we're looking at a bit more than that in this area. We're looking to ensure that we basically don't close down through a process of mergers and acquisitions within the media landscape. Variety of voices, variety of reporting, variety of opinion that exists at the moment. And hopefully what we see is a burgeoning through new media of a more vibrant media as well.
Alan, we heard your communication spokesman Malcolm Turnbull there concerned about the changes that the government's introduced. But given the changes that are going on in the media, while newspaper organisations don't use public spectrum like commercial TV stations do, they're getting into the broadcast game as well as the print game. Why isn't there a need to have a look at making sure that a diversity of voices, that a commitment to local news still exists?
I think you almost answered your question there, Lyndal, because there's more diversity of voices today than there ever has been through these new media. I mean, there's bloggers every day going on online. There's TV channels which are also putting some online news content. There's newspapers which have got videos on their internet sites as well. I think this legislation actually is a solution in search of a problem, and because we already have competition laws and other laws in place too. I mean, the other thing I'd say is that the pace of these reforms in terms of being introduced on Thursday and supposedly having them passed by next week is treating the Parliament and treating the media industry with absolute contempt.
But they've been talked about for a number of months, haven't they? The options have been canvassed.
They've been talked about for 2.5 years in terms of broadly this so-called need for media reform, but we haven't seen the details until today. It's the first time we've heard about what the exact proposals are. We don't know what the public interest test, how that will be defined, and we won't know until Thursday. And then what you're telling me, we've got 5 days to examine this and to try to come to a conclusion on one of the absolute central pillars in our democracy, that if we get wrong, it has very significant ramifications.
Stephen, I ask you that point. Parliament's, after this 2-week sitting of Parliament, Parliament's got another 5 weeks before you get up for the winter break and then go into the election. Why the need to rush this through in effectively a week?
It's not a new set of propositions. As you said yourself, Finkelstein handed the report down over 12 months ago. There's been a hell of a lot of public debate in the Parliament and outside of it about the recommendations. Now, we haven't gone as far as Finkelstein has recommended in the bill that will come before the Parliament. The Australian people expect us to work when we come down here. We sit 12 hours a day. They expect us to do something. It's not just the theatrics of question time. And I think between the 70-odd members either side of the House, if we can't look at the detail of this bill, turn our minds and our expertise to it and sort it out and get it through the Parliament in the week that we have before us, then we're not really trying hard enough.
They also expect us, though, Lyndal, to consult. And so when we put a very significant proposal on the table, that we actually consult industry, we consult the public about the ramifications of it. Ordinarily, this type of bill would go to a committee, for example, for there to be an inquiry into it, so that we can hear all the various voices and understand what the concerns, what the unintended consequences might be. I mean, this, frankly, this is treating the Parliament and the people of Australia with contempt.
We had 12 months of consultation, Alan. You guys were involved in it.
What
we
is
had
the
12
public
months of
interest
it.
test? You don't know what the public interest is, how that will be defined.
That
is a key thing, how we define what the public interest test is. That can mean all sorts of things to different people.
When I hear Liberals saying they want more time to consult, I hear them saying, in another word, what they want is more time to say no.
We might move on now to the changes announced on coal seam gas by the Environment Minister, Tony Burke.
It means if an approval is given, the community expectation that I will have taken into account all the implications for water resources will in fact be my legal obligation.
The coal seam gas issue is the one that's really triggering community angst and concern, and what we're looking to do here is have a process that people can have some confidence in.
Alan, amongst other community concerns about coal seam gas, there has been a deal of concern about the impact of coal seam gas, in particular on water, including on the aquifers. Is it not reasonable that it's something that the federal government has as a consideration when it's looking at coal seam gas projects?
Yeah, you're right, Lyndal. There are community concerns about coal seam gas, and we want to ensure that our water supplies are not damaged, that we maintain the security of those water supplies. So we're open to having a look at the details in the legislation. We haven't seen it yet. We've got some reservations about whether or not this legislation will be retrospective. We have some reservations about whether it's even constitutional, and also whether it'll add just another layer of red tape and hold things up. But we're open to having a look at the legislation to try to see if we can progress this.
That issue of retrospectivity, Stephen, has come up because the Greens say that the federal government approved a couple of major projects before bringing in this rule. Is it a little too late to start bringing this rule now? Yeah,
it's not a Greens bill, it's a Labor bill, and we'll do this in a right and responsible way. Two important points. Firstly, if you come from an electorate, as I do, where there are concerns about coal seam gas on both sides of the ledger, people understand it is a potential and important energy source, but don't want to have it impacting on the environment, particularly the water table. You would understand that there is a need and an expectation on the federal level of government to do something about it. What this bill does is match the public expectation with the Commonwealth Government's legislative power to do something about it. And I've got to say, if some of the state governments around the place were doing a better job of regulating it, we probably wouldn't need to have this legislation before the power. The fact is they're not.
Could it be something, though, that's done in concert with the state government, so you don't see, as you have with other projects, effectively projects having to go through two separate but sometimes identical processes?
Yeah, the thing that's unique about water is it doesn't respect state borders. Whether it's aquifers, groundwater or rivers, they flow through state borders without having respect for whether it's Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, so on, etc. So yes, we do need to work with the states. Indeed we have, and we are. There's a COAG process underway to ensure that we have got some commonality of standards. On top of that, the Commonwealth is investing over closer to $15 million in science and research, which is what we have the best capacity to deal with. But there is a mismatch between what the public wants us to do and what we're currently able to do under the current legislation. So that's why water concerns will be a part of the Federal Minister's remit.
And Alan, it's important to, given there is public concern, to have a look at the science and the evidence before making decisions.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there already is an expert scientific panel in place, and we support that expert panel. And indeed, as Stephen said, there's already a process to engage with the states through a partnership arrangement. And it's one of our further concerns is why is that being shelved and this legislation rushed through? And I suspect there's some other political motives at play rather than purely just the science and the concern with the community.
The answer is it's not being shelved. We can walk and chew gum. We can enhance the Minister's capacity to look after the legitimate concerns about impact on water, as well as working with the states around other standards. We can and should.
Stephen, I want to ask you about something that came up in the Labor caucus meeting today. Some MPs, we're told, raised concerns about the time it's taking for the Sports Drug Agency investigation into sporting teams, particularly in the rugby league. Do you share those concerns?
What I won't be doing here, Lyndal, is disclosing the details of conversations that have gone on between individuals and questions that are raised inside our caucus. What I will say is this is an important issue. Every sports fan in the country wants to ensure that when they take their kids along to the sport, they're holding up our public idols for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. That said, in this country, we don't hang somebody before we have a proper judicial process, and we need to get the balance right on that.
And one final question to you both. Parliament was back today for the first time, the House of Representatives for the first time in 3 weeks. There were some interjections from the public gallery aimed at the Prime Minister. Some people were escorted, a number of people were escorting out of the public gallery. The Speaker had some stern words for those people interjecting. What do you believe is an acceptable level of behaviour from the public, some of whom might feel strongly about what's happening on the floor of the chamber?
I mean, the behaviour which occurred today was simply unacceptable. There was some name-calling of the Prime Minister and shouting out from the gallery, so it was interrupting proceedings. Now, that shouldn't be tolerated. Yes, there can be chatter. Yes, there can be some discussion amongst themselves. And normally there's a fair bit of noise from the from where we are ourselves. So for us to be able to hear the gallery suggests that they really are shouting at the top of their voices, and that's just not appropriate.
And Stephen?
Look, I don't think we can afford to be too prissy about political discussion and debate in this country. I welcome a robust debate, but there's a time and place where you do it. And inside the Parliament House, in the gallery where there's serious questions and answers going on, is probably not the place. There's plenty of other places around this building where protests regularly go on, and that's proper.
And thank you for engaging in a bit of robust discussion here today. Alan Tudge and Stephen Jones, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Lyndal.
Good on you.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, good night.